Huge news for Victoria 3, its first major patch has received a whole load more information, as well as some information about an upcoming hotfix likely to hit our screens very soon. In this video, joined of course by shookvic, I'd encourage you to subscribe and join us for the journey. We'll be unpacking everything that you need to know about Victoria's patch 1.1. My name is JumboPixel, and let's not muck about. You know the drill. Let's jump straight in. First and foremost, let's put it in context. The developers say that patch 1.1 will be, of course, the first major post-release patch, and they aim to get it to us after liking the video before the end of the year. Patch 1.1 is primarily going to focus on something that I think a lot of you will be excited about. One of the most overwhelming things I hear about: game polish, bug fixing, balancing, and AI improvements, as well as improvements to the user interface. And while the next major free patch after this one will be more focused on some of the things that we talked about last time in my video from last week, things like the war system and diplomacy, this one is more focused on populations, user interfaces, bug fixing, balancing, and polishing the overall experience. However, that being said, they also shared a variety of changes to gameplay here as well. So I think it's important that we put it in context. This is a patch to fix and polish a lot of things with some gameplay adjustments alongside. Speaking of which, we actually also caught a few glimpses. Here's the first one. This one is looking at one of the first major changes that will be coming in patch 1.1, and that's the overview of the populations. Honestly, this is a huge change that's really needed. I feel like most people actually don't even look at this stuff because it's so buried within mousing over user interface, tooltip after tooltip. Let's see what the devs have to say. The first of the changes in the rework will focus on individual pops, with an emphasis on improving their needs, and that is a big one. We'll take a closer look at that in just a minute. In addition, they say that there's also now separate tabs for economy and consumption. Economy showing more detailed breakdown of their income and expenditure, and the top 5 goods. There they go, look at that. Grain, liquor, clothes, furniture and services. What more could you want from your life? And anyway, those top 5 goods, alongside their pricing information, is presented to us really clearly. The plan here, of course, is that we'll be able to actually see what our populations need. This will help with a whole load of mechanics inside of the game that you may or may not be overlooking. From simple things like supply and demand in the market, to, of course, the always important standard of living. If the people can't get the goods that they need, their standard of living will decline. Here we have a much better overview of this consumption statistic. You can see the proportion of each good that the populations are consuming. In this case, we're probably looking at the lower strata populations because they're impoverished, and you can see that 27.5% of their goods consumption is on grain, and grain in the economy is priced plus 18% over its base. Therefore, these people are struggling to buy their grain alongside a load of other goods, all of their main needs. So those would be the things that I'd want to fix first. It's great to have this information presented up front. Hopefully we'll be able to make better use of it as players. Speaking of systems we really ought to be able to make better use of, the next one on their hit list for the patch 1.1 in Victoria 3 anyway, is a rework of legitimacy. Legitimacy is that function that your government will hold. The more clout at the moment that they have, the more legitimate they'll be, and that will let you pass laws faster, but not necessarily easier. In the 1.1 patch, legitimacy will be reworked around common criticisms that we've placed on it. In particular, that it doesn't matter enough, that it isn't clear enough with its effects, and that elections don't have enough of an impact. That one is particularly important, especially, of course, for a democratic state, where you could basically just ignore the will of the people and put whoever you want in power. The rework aims to resolve all problems at once by making several changes to legitimacy. Firstly, it will have a numbered-based system from 0 to 100. We'll delve into the detail in just a sec, but that system is divided into 5 different categories of legitimacy, from an illegitimate government right the way through to a righteous government. And finally, it actually looks like these thresholds have a real impact. At the bottom end, the illegitimate government is considered completely illegitimate, and, quote, it will make a steady stream of radicals in increased numbers the lower the legitimacy is, end quote, and also it, quote, makes it impossible to enact laws. I'm assuming they're not speaking hyperbole here, and it will actually physically be impossible. You will not even be able to click one. That makes a lot of sense, of course, for a wildly illegitimate government. In the next step, up to about the halfway point, the government is generally not considered acceptable to the people, but you can push through laws. Opposition interest groups will disapprove and radicals will be generated over time. That's what we would expect from the system. As you move up through contested governments and into legitimate ones, the foundations of your government begin to solidify. Opposition groups disapprove slightly less, or offer no ill effects on pushing certain things through. Right the way up, of course, to a righteous government where the government's legitimacy is considered to be unassailable. In addition to generating loyalists over time, the enactment time for new laws will be cut in half. So we're seeing major penalties at the bottom end, completely restricting us from using the government and legal system. And then at the top end, it's a huge buff, twice as strong as the status quo. Nice to see big changes there. However, it's actually not all. Because of course legitimacy is about government. Here's a look at a work in progress shot of one of those governments, and you can see that it's an unacceptable one. They didn't command enough of the vote within their democracy to actually be able to reach that vital halfway threshold. They had 47% of the vote. And because they're in a democracy, their government is now considered an unacceptable one, less legitimate than its peers. In the detail, we see that they share some more information. The way you gain legitimacy has been altered in democracies, with share of the vote, not just their clout or coolness or popularity, represented in government having a direct effect on our legitimacy, the way it should have been. Nice to see the change. The degree to which, of course, depends on the laws. Under more restrictive systems, clout has a more important role than votes. But as population become more enfranchised, universal suffrage, as you maybe make that shift, it should, quote, be virtually impossible for a government that doesn't have the voters behind it to be considered legitimate, end quote. Nice to see that system receive, I think, the polish that it needs. And I think one of the overarching things that's coming through, at least in the information they've shared so far, is one of both polish and refining these systems anyway. However, of course, the fun doesn't stop just yet. And before moving on to the vital question of patch when, there are some big changes coming to the way that we structure our society, standard of living, and laws. Let's jump into the detail a little bit. Lastly for today, they're bringing changes to church, state, and citizenship laws. Previously, it was really just a matter of trading off tolerance with authority. State religion, loads of authority. Total separation, less authority. The other impacts were not especially felt by the player, and it was neither balanced nor perhaps accurate to real life, which Victoria 3, while being a sandbox game rather than explicitly tied to history, does need to represent that. To try and address it, they've made it so that by default, more radicals are created by standard of living decreases than loyalists from standard of living increases. However, offset this with modifiers on the more restrictive laws that increase loyalists and reduce radical gain, but only among the accepted parts of the population. The more restrictive our cultural or religious tolerance, the greater the effect on the part of the population that it's actually targeting feels. Basically what they're saying here is they're trying to make these laws feel a bit more real in-game. If we work through a quick example, state religion will provide us with a lot more authority, and the people who benefit from that state religion will be more likely to be loyal to us. Radicalism, however, from decreases in standard of living due to that discrimination or not being part of that accepted religion, will be felt more harshly. That's my take on these changes. Of course, we'll have to wait and see how they play out in-game. But overall, seems like a good thing, because at the moment, these laws, for some players, and in a lot of playthroughs, can just be a way to farm authority and raise or lower interest groups. Now, on to the big question. When can we expect these changes, or some of these changes? Patch when? And that, my demanding friends, is a wonderful question. Patch 1.1, as we mentioned at the start of the video, is planned to be released before the end of the year, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out that maybe with a holiday period, end of year shutdown, we're probably looking to see it within the next 3 to 6 weeks. Likely at the latter part of that, but that's just me guessing. They're also working, however, on a hotfix 1.0.6, one version ahead of where we are now, which should, quote, hopefully include some late game performance improvements. Big one for a lot of you. The only reason why I emphasize that is because I've seen a lot of people comment, particularly as you move towards the late game and it starts to get more demanding on your system, that performance becomes a significant issue. Maybe the hotfix next week will be able to fix just that. And that's right, it is coming next week because they go on to say they aim to release that one sometime next week. So we'll keep an eye on the Steam page for that, and I'll be sure to update you when it does release, alongside, of course, the big patch 1.1 later this year. So, with that covered, let's summarize the direction of this patch. First and foremost, changes to the legal system are coming through, and the social, political, church, state, and citizenship laws, particularly, of course, those church and state ones. And by providing a legitimacy system that literally makes it impossible for governments who are completely illegitimate to pass laws, or those who are completely legitimate can pass them at double the pace, with of course varying levels in between, the legitimacy system should more accurately serve the player and those changes to democracies and authoritarian regimes. Down at the level of the people, we also saw, of course, big changes coming to the population overview, the goods that they need and expect, how much they're paying for them. All that information is no longer going to be buried behind a myriad of tooltips, but instead presented upfront for all of us to see and use, because it's really powerful information, especially around standard of living. And if I were to connect the dots that weren't quite connected in the developer's diary explicitly, I would say that everything in here is actually focused around radicalism, loyalists, and the standard of living. On the population screen, we can read it better, use it better. With laws, of course, and legitimacy, it's very obvious. I'm looking forward to seeing how this patch update plays out, and I'll be sure to cover it, of course, on the channel. Thank you so much for joining me today as we looked at Victoria's 1.1 patch update coming sometime before the end of 2022. See you next time, everybody. Take care.